Azim, Azim Premji University and Ambedkar University, Delhi. She's been a former associate professor at the Department of Human Development and Childhood Study, Lady Irving College, Delhi University, and former director, Education and Research, Gully Gully Sim Sim, preschool television in collaboration with Sesame, New York. Dr. Asha's extensive field based experiences nurtured an interest in folk arts and modes of society. Her multiple interests in childhood and arts have kept her connected with initiatives in art education. She has been on the advisory board of the Theatre and Education Company at NSD that has helped her shape the ideas on arts based learning. She's also worked with teachers of young children using dramatic medium to promote the use of theatre as a classroom resource. Her insights for arts and in education have kept her in touch with NCERT and National Curriculum Framework 2005. Our last speaker would be Dr. Payal Chattopadhyay Mukherjee. Her work focuses on cosmopolitanism, home, colonial and post-colonial literature, Indian nationalism, women and gender, history of ideas, and South Asian studies. She has written for several scholarly publications, including Rutledge Research in Post-Colonial Literatures, South Asian Review, Journal of Human Values, Sahitya Academy, Gandhi Marg, to name a few, and has presented her research at academic forums like the European Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies, SALA, which is South Asian Literary Association, Association for Asian Studies, and Canadian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies. Currently, she is a faculty member at the SSH Department of IIT Delhi and an adjunct professor at the Department of English University in Canada. Uh, may I please welcome the first speaker, Ritu Sinha, on the podium.
Hi, all of you. A very good afternoon to all of you. Um, I again begin by thanking the organizers, uh, Professor Dev, our chair, um, and my co-panelists, other friends, um, and to giving me this opportunity to speak. I am absolutely new to this arena of childhood, understanding childhood and knowing about childhood, but I will try to make a small kind of presentation on talking about representation when at the time when we are talking about mediated childhood, what representation does to the entire notion of the mediated childhood. And it just be a very elementary kind of understanding through some of the observations and questions. So what I will do is I'll take you very quickly through the idea of what shifts are we talking about in the terrain of media when we talk about mediated childhoods, and then sort of how do we understand mediation, and it is within this context then we allocate representation and then talk about the representations in the Indian context or what can be the newer possibilities. Uh, to begin with, when we are talking about or when we discuss um, the term mediated, and we do understand that there has been a recognition of the fact that children's lives are digitally intertwined. And despite digital divide across the world, or despite the divide between the global north and the global south, there is been a certain kind of um, idea which is persisting in the scholarly studies, that the lives of the children are, if not anything, but at least from the mobile phones, are digitally intertwined. So there is this work by which is called the Thumb Revolution in India. Which is talking about access to mobile phones. Uh, it is in this context that one can see or understand that how the lives of the children are digitally intertwined. However, I have a lot of reservation with this and with the very idea of the mediated childhood, but sometime later we can discuss. But to begin with, when we talk about the mediated what is mediated in the contemporary? So I believe I'm also exploring, and I'm here to learn from my co-panelists. But to begin to understand is that when we are talking about mediated, it is definitely reflecting towards a certain historical shift which has happened in the larger terrain of media, and a shift or one can say the expansion and reformulation of the traditional mass communication. Um, which is now including newer artifacts, which is including newer devices, which is including new forms of communication in terms through these devices and new kinds of artifacts. And of course, then it leads to newer challenges of analyzing it. And also, why? Because with this kind of arrangement, then also comes new social arrangements and new institutional arrangements. And that sort of leads us to, kind of evolve a more focused kind of understanding of what these reformulations and developments mean. And it is here that the concept of the childhood has to be located when we are talking about mediated in terms of the idea that everything is mediated in today's life, as Livingston will say, that everything is mediated. We are in a network society, global society, and the lives of the children are so much dependent on the electronic gadgets for pleasure, for play, for learning. And so there have been an ample, whole gamut of work which are indicating 5 minutes left. I've just started. Sorry. Okay. All right, I'll try to, then I will, okay, it's just, all right. So I was trying to say that when we look at this, there are a huge set of scholarly production which are looking into macro and the micro kind of interrelations. And within this macro and micro interrelations, there are ample scope for exploring, childhoods, which we have seen in this conference as well. This conference has been a wonderful site for the reproductions of this kind of interactions or interrelatedness between macro and micro. So there is dynamism, there is challenges which are existing in terms of having these interactions. But one thing is very, very clear, that there is the modes of analysis are expanding in terms of looking into the arrangements. I will emphasize on the social and institutional arrangements, which actually reflect on the idea of representation. I'll come to that. And very briefly, when we talk about mediation, then what does mediation means? And to me, there are three things which are relevant according to these scholarly works. Is one, as I said, first, that there has to be an analysis of the social and the organizational arrangements. So between the micro and the macro, as I said, and then to understand mediation as cultural processes. So we are talking about media cultures, childhood cultures, etc., and also understanding mediation as the cultural processes, which we understand that power is negotiated between the dominant institutions and the popular or the resistant movements. So, which is what, again, this was quite a sight. Then it links, it's also important to see that it links distinct spheres of inquiry, mass and interpersonal communication, and at present we have what we call as hybrid form of communication. That again is a newer way to look at how representations are unfolding, this hybrid form of communication. And the most important part, which is following the critical theory, is that mediation again. So when I'm talking about mediated childhoods or mediation, then it hides or disguises conflicts, and it naturalizes the idea of what we call as mediation. So there are certain universalized notions of childhood which are mediated, and if they are mediated, they are somehow naturalized. Now this is where the challenge lies when it comes to sort of looking at the different dynamism of the mediated childhood. And so if you see, what appears is that uh, if we say that this very idea that there is naturalization of mediation and there is disguise of the social conflict, it rejects the idea that media reflects reality. And on the other hand, when we say that media reflects, is not reflecting reality, it is reflecting the social and the material, which means the relations of power. And this is where representation, when we use the term representation, representation actually is centered to the entire idea of understanding media. And at the same time, um, uh, with this concept that it is naturalized and how it creates a disguise, it is also that I bring into this notion that when we talk about representation, it's in media, it is politics of representation. And it is this politics of representation which is relevant in terms of understanding what we call as mediated childhood. And so representation might be a visual or written audio depiction of something. It might be a mediated image or a narrative, which is usually shown through visual media. And politics of representation would mean various social groups, how they are represented in a larger in relation to the society as a whole. So if you see, if you begin from here and understand childhood, there are several questions and there are several, kind of imaginations. And what the professor in the morning was, our chair morning was pointing out, that there is a necessity, or what they had also pointed out, that there is a necessity to then question not just the, modalities of research, the forums from where these conceptions are still stuck. Like, for example, it's still the mediated childhood is coming still from the childhood studies, or what we call as very centric to the childhood kind of framework, or from the rights framework. But there are other ways in which this particular question has to be, raised with. So with the anthropology, with sociology, now these subjects which are essentially not dealing with childhood at all needs to relook, because when we look into politics of representation, these are essentially identity of the social groups. And with the feminist studies and with the civil rights movements and other kinds of identity, movements, racial movements, and subaltern later, it has sensitized the idea of politics of representation. It is in this context that the idea of childhood has to be located, rather than just stricting or just time is up. Okay, rather than bringing it only in the context of the rights, or only in the context or the frameworks which are provided from the Western, notions. So in various, sessions and papers, we have discussed that how the indigenous frameworks are required, how there are, culture-specific, cross-cultural kind of idea within a South Asian context. Such frameworks and such kinds of newer empirical works are required, because if representations have to be seen, representations have to be seen epistemologically, it has to be seen theoretically as well as empirically. It is with the combination of this that we do understand what is mediated childhood. So I'm stopping myself here. There was lots to say. Thank you so much. No, I really apologize.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, I welcome Asha Singh to the podium. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Since memos will come, I'll go directly. I'll stick to my paper. So if I don't make eye contact, pardon me. So mediated is a nice word, and the speaker before me did say question, reflect, etc., etc. So mediated for me also, I come from a discipline of child development, so it will be totally child focused and everyday encounters and the difficulties children face or their trials and triumphs are equally important. I read a very interesting thing about the 20th century being the century of childhood, written by J.D. Roberts in his review of Montgomery's book, Introduction to Childhood, Anthropological Perspectives on Children's Lives. I like the word lives. My discipline is interdisciplinary, so we do the anthropological perspective, looking at the children from the sociological lens, etc. You might come to know all this as I speak. So the 21st century presents a phase of re-examining, recentering of childhood. Sometimes we say to theories that, oh, that was an old theory. The new came based on the old, right? So we can't, so traditions, we can't just throw them off. We learn, we reject, we move. So world over, there is a growing, in the sessions that I attended, there is a persistent thing about, understandings come from Western psychology, Western perspectives, Western theories. There's nobody stopping you to create your work. Learn from around the globe what is happening. World over, there's a growing understanding of culture and local ecologies and the child's primary environment. Children's lives, childhood, and their developmental processes have been the focus of many descriptions and many disciplines. We heard the media and children, etc. Keeping the economy of time, I will cut out the frills and share moments of mediation as receptions. I tried to play around with the title. Moments of mediation as receptions in response to representations. Today's children are amidst many overlapping ecologies. Our discipline, earlier, people still say that how will the child learn if we don't? But schooling is compulsory. Technologies come to stay. Print came to stay. So, we have to adjust and we have to kind of look at evolutionary aspects to looking at human lives. Our discipline views children from an interdisciplinary perspective. My thoughts are often validated by Vygotsky, Piaget. I'm very influenced by George Herbert Mead's, looking at symbolic interaction and its influence on children's development and values of sociality. Everyday lives are quite well embedded in web of many social ecologies, as theorized by another person who I look up to is Bronfenbrenner's model of ecology. Closer at home, influenced by the tropical geography, our thinkers give primary prominence to nature and looking at the whole child, uh, as responded by, propounded by Aurobindo. I don't want to go into too many things, but we in our discipline do think Indian. And so to drive my points pointedly, I share childhood instances that never leave my thought. So let's look at children's society and schools. Language often becomes an issue. One of the things where the, contesting ecologies, the child's language at home, is something else. And the feisty children who are going to school, they lose all their spontaneity because the language of the school and the transactions are very different. Thank goodness, NEP 2020 looks at it. We have to implement it in our training programs, in the way we orient teachers. So language is an issue, especially in our country where there's a book that's come out for children. Anyway, my granddaughter is sitting there and she knows the name of the book. Maybe I'll ask her. It's a childhood version of Peggy Mohan's book about languages. So, again, work has been done in this area where to sustain the interest of children. Because motivated children who are interested, who know names of many trees, many birds, often the school environment just kind of stifles their curiosity. And something there are so many students in here, but when you go out and do research, look at the tools. Of course, we talk about cultural adaptation of standardized tools, etc. But look at the questions. Are they influenced by cultural capital? In the sense that, in one university very close, I won't name it, the researchers came and they were doing a presentation in a big conference like this. The children, when they walk with us home, are full of life and they are full of questions, but they perform so well, and they were labeled as cognitively deficient. So, you have to look at what kind of questions. Do our tests have questions about name 10 trees? So the questions have to be both balanced in favor of the urban, the rural. So the geography is looking at it. So mediating in a way that there's equal opportunity. We often talk about rights perspective, etc. Very important. I'll come to it. So revival of appreciating differences is very important in higher education teaching also. Appreciation of differences. I don't like the word tolerance so much. It still has a hierarchy to it. But, differences are there. Yeah. So our research often finds, okay, and can we become aware of, I've looked at it, I'm not going. Often children lose their vigor, interest, and represent a rowdy or reserved countenance. Either children will become very boisterous and, like in our school, we had a school in our college, which was an early childhood center. It also evolved according to the needs of society. It started as a nursery school. It became a, care center. It evolved into disabilities. It evolved into care. So, the child could come to us at 6 months of age and be with us till 12. Because that's how the society changed. So mediation is required in many ways. And at this point, disconnectedly, I would like to introduce the word educare. Because education and care cannot be, should not be torn apart and say they are two different things, especially for the young child. Anyway, mediations by concerned and attentive adults probe unfolded many. These are the everyday encounters that I want to share, which I encountered when I was doing teacher training. How much time do I have? Okay. So sometimes there are dysfunctional families. So there was a child who was going around the assembly, and all of us educated in India know the significance and the value and the formal aspects of a morning assembly. So this child was walking around with his handkerchief. And, I said, when they described this incident to me, I said, have you talked to the parents? The mother is always in a hurry. The she comes and we are not able to talk to her. Anyway, I was able to go 1 month later. And because the question was raised, can we talk to the mother about personal issues? I said, the child is there for you. What are you waiting for? Luckily, our country didn't have rules of, ethics of questioning, etc. Anyway, the child was settled and the child was abandoned. And he was questioning that why do I not have a full family? So, you have to be alert because every time you cannot have a counselor doing things. The teachers, the people who come in contact with children need to be aware of body language, of the language children are using. So really, there are webs of significance. I'm borrowing the term. There is an apparent need to identify the specific concern of the disturbed, oblique, I don't like the word disturbed, but distracted child. Supporting actions of dismissal amidst pressures of routines. Many times political instability and violence interfaces with children's lives. And it's now not so much in news, but children growing up in Kashmir in 19-20 years of insurgency, coming in contact with them was an eye opener as to how much I'm winding up, um, how much children are affected. And seemingly they will be like, taking part in a theater exercise or a music thing, because I went from Delhi thinking, oh, they will be sitting like this, everybody doesn't wear grief on their sleeves. But you scratch a little. I had a session of 44 children, just because they had shared a similar loss, and all of them were together, 44 children, and there was one common factor: absence of father, either missing or dead, and very heart-wrenching stories. So the kind of mediation that was done was arts, using theater to relieve and kind of act as a cathartic effort to help children come. So reframing and recentering, I'll just come down to it. And it's really to end on a real positive note. There have been many emerging laws. The laws in the 20th century centered around labor laws and where children came in. But now there are laws directly relating to children, and more laws are being devised, as you know, and expanding the scope of the laws, because there are sexual offenses that are happening, but a lot of research is needed in that area because the way they are translated. And there are many gaps because after all, we can't say laws are made and nothing happens. Laws are made, but they have to be tested out with reality because social life is not, it changes. So there are a couple of researchers who are looking into how it's translating, because teachers are getting into trouble because the law says you have to report. If you report, then it's kind of you become a witness. With school life, with home life, you have to go. So policy directives are there. You have to implement them. So there's need for research and building. Just 30 seconds more. So if I were to say what kind of mediations are necessary, one is dignity to children. I didn't even go into that area of children are active media or, meaning makers, social actors and all, because, I think this August audience who is in this area will know. So dignity to children, focus on children's experience. Children, when they come to school, bring a whole lot of their own experiences. Comprehend children's crisscrossing of many different social ecologies. As far back as mid-70s, the need for care. There is that famous experiment of rhesus monkeys, The Wire Mesh Mother by Harry Harlow in Madison, Wisconsin, where there was a wire mesh mother with a bottle of milk and there was a monkey. The milk didn't matter after a while. It was the warmth that attracted the children. So with that, I end. I may have missed certain connections. Sorry.
Our third speaker, Payal Mukherjee, please.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Very grateful to Professor Dave Pathak for inviting me here, and I'm going to stick to what Professor Reza tells, that we have to be on time, and that's my primary mandate. Okay, so with that, I begin what I have to say, and my topic is about beyond those little narratives, the complex circumference of representing childhood in South Asia. Now, I'm going to take a step back and look at what we have already produced culturally, and uh, there is this immense repertoire of cultural productions that we have on childhood stories and narratives, and there's a good lot of things that we can take from that and learn and move forward. So when we took a look at this idea of childhood and representation, one of the most important things that even before this session started, it was all about a lori that was being played about a child talking to the mother, and the kind of imagination, the space for accommodating the unknown is there, and that becomes a very important idea of shaping childhood, in which the questions, the worries, the dreams, the anticipations and imaginations are all nurtured into this idea of dialogues. So with that idea, uh, this representation of childhood in our kind of stories have been through this very important ideas of loris and small little poems. In Bengali we call chora, when people have this idea of rhyming very fast little rhymes. And even Rabindranath Tagore had this first line written, jol pore pata nade, right? It's like it's raining, the leaves are moving. So children associate with this very small little ideas that they see around, and they try to make sense of that. In today's childhood, probably we are so much getting this regularized idea of they becoming adults that we sometimes do not accommodate the flexibility of their immense imagination into our kind of narratives. So when we talk of the depiction of children, one of the ways in which we know is through Charles Dickens. When we look at the different stories, like we have the novels like Nicholas Nickleby, for example, extreme amount of regimentation and schooling and regularization on children, where they're supposed to eat, drink, move, sleep, talk, study, everything according to what we think they should be doing. It's almost like training programs. It's almost like introducing them to that idea of the adults very first, whenever they have just started to know what it means to be in the world of adults. Now, when we look at this kind of childhood, the importance of leisure, the importance of the mediation of spaces, which can be very incoherent to our own spaces, hardly exist. And the accommodation of incoherent dialogues, being away from the structured patterns of being and becoming, is completely challenged, and most cases understood to be the child with some other kind of issues. So what we are looking at is that when we talk about the little narratives, the childhood scope and stories and spaces, whose narratives are we looking at? What kind of children are we trying to produce in today's society? And what kind of minds would those children have? Beginning from the day scare to the time they are becoming adults? Are they not fed on the kind of things we think they should be systematically, mechanically dealt with? It takes me to the first part, which I'll do very quickly, which is about how we are looking at the understanding childhood. I'll refer to Tagore because I read a lot of him. And the first thing that comes to my mind is a representation of a short story called Chuti. Chuti means holiday, in which a boy, Fotik, very young boy, is taken away from his rural environment to a more sanitized, educated environment in the city, right? And but what happens is the loss of innocence and the understanding of that innocence as mischief. Understood because it is not fitting into that paradigm which we want the child to be designed for. When we look at Tagore memoirs, we find that Tagore himself used to stand long hours in front of the window looking at various things outside. He had a childhood mediated by servants, taking care of him because his parents were busy, they had a different kind of a household. But what happened was the aspirational part of growing up, the growth coupled with the ungrowth is also very, very important. When we look at this idea of childhood becoming a narrative in itself, it is promoting to the future narratives, but it's holding the hand of the present very strong. There's a beautiful poem called Veer Purush, in a child imagining that the child is not protected, but becoming the protector. This journey of becoming responsible, the agency of becoming somebody to be identified with, is a journey that happens in the dream. Most of us have read the essay by Charles Lamb, Dream Children. Charles Lamb never had children. These were the children of the unborn. But he wanted those children to ask him questions, throw things away, become a part of his stories, be the partners, bring that chaotic phase into his life. These mediations become extremely important when we want to accommodate the luxury of being in the childhood. And that's very important, which takes me to the second part, which is the disorientation of childhood, which happens because of many, many reasons. We were just talking of war, we were talking of segregations, we were talking of political strifes, we are talking of different kind of social diseases that exist. For example, if you look at Orokonia, a very beautiful short story by, I make a novella by Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, talks of this urgency of a very young girl to get married. And even I was just working with UNICEF and child marriage, uh, children being thrown out of the education system is still there. We already know child pregnancy. These are becoming very strong issues, and we cannot think of them as issues of the past. They're very much real, but why are they so much existing? What happens to us when we negate the idea of flexibility, leisure, idea of growth in childhood not being regulated? uh, when I read Salman Rushdie, Harun and the Sea of Stories, or if you have read Midnight Children, you know that such interesting events happen when the network is connected, because all of them were born at that particular time, and they all can probably the nodes becomes a medium of communication. It becomes a very important network that children could do on themselves, by themselves, without the mediation of anybody required. So this war, discontent, unhomeliness, these are very, very important parts of South Asian literature where children narratives are shown. And one of the things that I want to highlight is a story by Naomi Munaira. She had written a novel, it's called Island of Thousand Mirrors, in which a child was supposedly taken away from the homeland in Sri Lanka to the US. And there, the example that she gives is of hydrangea flowers, which changes color because of the shift in the alkalinity of the soil. And the child tells that, am I going to absorb what is given to me, or am I going to retain what I've already absorbed? And that is a very important question we need to ask, that what are we providing as a society for them to absorb and retain and probably even relieve, get rid of it. Some of them should be thrown off. Which brings me to the third, and the idea of alternate ideas. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of, like, there are many things to talk about. It's a very short time, so I have to really shift. Just I came, yeah, I just wrote a note in Pathapatri as well. It's about when you look at that, if you look at the stories, the child, the very important idea is wonder. You know, Bishoy, we call it. When somebody is looking at like awe. I have a 3-year-old baby girl, and she says, ah, when she looks at something. I don't do that. I have lost it because I don't feel the wonderment at very small things. And that's the childhood that she needs to retain, and I need to give her. The final part of it is the alternate ideas of ungrowth. There's a very, very powerful story called Shishu by Mahashita Devi, in which, of course, a relief officer goes with some materials and food and resources into the jungles and finds that a lot of children come to him. asking for those arms. Yeah, I'm done. And then he realizes that these stunted little bodies are not children. They are men, adult men and women who have not grown up. Their bodies have not grown up. Their bodies have remained stunted because of the scarcity of food, of resources, of livelihood. The story continues with a lot of systems and the problems in the system. But what my question is, scarcity of the body metaphorically denotes also the scarcity of our minds. The way we are taking away the resources, trying to keep it for something, or understand that resources themselves need to flourish given the context and the condition from where you are trying to understand for what is the purpose of that resource, why do we have it. So it's very important that when we are looking at this absolute huge complex, and I would say a very dynamic plethora of narratives, the mediation that needs to happen within those narratives is to make it better, to make it a place where we can include the idea of self-respect, dignity, experience, narratives, and also to have this freedom to have your own voices being inculcated without being constantly reminded how you should be or what you should be according to the lens somebody else have created in probably in Macaulay's system of education. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee. Now I welcome our chair, Professor Shamim Reza, to give his observations and points and comments. And he should be glad to know that he has 12 whole minutes to do this. 12 whole minutes. Yes. 1, 2.
That's not the files. Extraordinary. Look at it. That other very programmatic, analysis and questions. Give it to all three speakers. That's extraordinary. I mean, if they haven't written it down yet, I mean, should write it up in one article. And I'm suggesting the permission organizers that you have to discuss together the video and try to prepare it from all three people. Before we take the questions, I must thank Joshua again. That's been here. It's already all of us. Okay. And before we talk, whatever the program is about, we get about organizers. We talk about leaders who do this. So we must recognize the Kushia Satovia, which is working for the Kushia compensation. So, question is this. I mean, if you have got any comments, better send it to them digital. If you have specific questions, then you can. Any questions? No? Then comments? Good or bad? Sure. Does anyone? Any question? Any relevant thing? Oh.
Let me compliment all the three panelists for very brilliant presentation, first of all. Secondly, what comes to my mind that if you see the trajectory of a child's growth, I do not find, I mean, of course, we very submersive, but there is always an element of mediation. There is the stage. I mean, in terms of some restrictions, in terms of some restrictions. And till the moment that child is not able to see it good or bad, whether it is effective or negative, he is in a position to make a decision about that, he accepts it. And a level of variation it reaches when the question comes. When the radiator itself is under question. No, this is not actually, and this will again, I'm saying that it will vary from culture to culture. It will also vary from a culture in which a child grows. The culture of family, the culture of his peer group, and all. And so the variation does affect the child in positive directions also. It also has some negative dimensions at some point of time, and particularly when it is educated. Okay, no, I don't think of time. When the child is in a position to make a kind of a judgment about a point which is being debated upon, and he has a point of view, then he questions it. Okay, no, this is, I don't think this is correct. This is just what I thought.
Okay. So, you want the solution? And I particularly vaccine book is Chile, and in form Soviet era, was translated in Indian language. The beginning with his grandfather, and before he reaches his adolescent stage, grandfather said, "You have been with us for many years. I cannot take you home. Go there, go out there. The word is yours." And Yogi says, "So I just came out the street and to the world. The Yogi said, "There's no longer a child. You can handle it." I think my understanding is that before you conclude, I think in order for us to understand the mediated childhood, along about all other issues, ideas and aspects, we must not forget some of the very common practices like gardening, the practices of gardening in South Asia. And we can find our mediated childhood. We should look at photographs. We haven't studied photography. We should look at the practice of fine arts. How we should mediate it through different forms of fine arts. In painting and sculpture, in printmaking, and even in Oriental art tradition. We should look at, of course, the performances from other performances. So we talk about folk tradition or literature. In addition to that, we possibly not argue, having looked at the recording industry, the music industry, children and music industry, even and recording industry. Whether it's the traditional format or it's traditional format, happening on the internet, but we must not forget all the very important areas. And when we are talking about mediated childhood, we must not forget the children in exile. In exile, the displaced children and the refugee children. Whatever we have discussed in the last 2 days, possibly not all children are in exile, because imagine the children in exile, or maybe a child in exile, or where the training are displaced, they are displaced, they are living in a refugee situation. The internet world, it's a digital world, it's a screen world. For example, language is explaining the internet. At the beginning, there was not given access to digital devices or connections or mobile phones. But traditionally discovered the television. So it is the same that always the child is mediated in times like ours, even historical, in this time, in normal time, in different political setups. It is the same in refugee life, in displaced life, or in a very conflicting situation. And what I understood from the poetry, they represent that everything is mediated, but issues particularly that issues of power, representation, the politics in which all this mediated will be informed and shaped. We should also look at Educare, say, education and care, with philosophy, with different techniques. They have to reject the question answer, but that's the only ours, okay, but we have. That really resonates with the diversity, but of course, understand immediate childhood. And the gender is quite important. Origins, children is a boy's children, boy's child. How male the female child. That is one of the solution right at the beginning of our male. My people, the female child doesn't mean. Others are all written all the big names that we have been discussing, that don't also celebrate. Our male children in a childhood, not the female child. I'm not just interpreting this from Western ideas in India. We may have a different one versus others. But that's an area that must not be overlooked and should be quite seriously. And of course, I mean, we have to make bridges between our developmental approach and our cultural approach towards character and development is always important. If you are so cynical and critical about that, then we should look at it. They'll be excluded from politics, they'll be excluded from citizenship, they'll be excluded from all these basic requirements that they statistics are important. The data are quite important. You need to integrate them into national policy, regional policy, the macro policy, the micro policy, in budgetary allocation, everywhere. So if you have too critical and cynical, that's very developmental. That's it. At the same time, when you combine this idea with our philosophy, with our experience, and the last two things that I would say, let's organize something like comparative childhood psychology. Let's look at it comparatively. Yeah, I mean, we should look over our internal practices comparatively. South Asia itself is comparative. India is comparative. Yes, that's it. Let's look at comparative childhood psychology. From very different perspective, very comparative. It fits with the objectives of the conference. And I think we should also document something called journey of a child. I mean, on the one hand, we need a comparative looking at the child. At the same time, we should try and document the journey of a child, the journey of a child, the narratives that all three of us try to say. That there are narratives, there are not one narrative, many different narratives, either produced by the adults, by the sympathetic, by the policymaker, by the power elites. But at the same time, children have to use that narrative. They have that. Very famous persons also in the late realized the importance of documenting a child. From my side, this to thank you all of the great presenters and participants. It's been very engaging. But please don't stop asking questions even the program is so much. Thank you everyone, those who supported here, the stage and beyond the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Reza, for finishing just in time. I think this session was particularly dense, so let's now break for tea and caffeine and come back here for the next panel session. Yeah, tea break.
I thought you wanted to give more plans to the presenters.
No, plans. You always have plans. Yeah. Yeah. Let's all reconvene at 3:30 for the valedictory session.